We're also streaming on my TikTok right now. Say hi
Hello, everybody.
Already? Okay.
Oh, I see. We're pointed right at us. Huh?
Yeah. They don't need to see me.
Hi,
Oh, look, there I am.
Yeah, there you are. All right. Well, do we want to just jump in and get started?
Yeah.
Get started. Yeah, and folks show up.
I mean,
All
as
right.
long as people are watching on TikTok.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Long. It's great to see you all. We are here, of course, to talk Jack Kirby. And as you can tell, the minute you bring up Jack Kirby, everybody wants to get in and be a part of that conversation. So I'm going to try my best to introduce everybody here on the panel. We've got, first of all, Adam McGovern. Adam, you wave to the folks. Adam is a comic writer who works with King-inspired artist Paulo Leander on comics such as Nightworld for Image Comics and Once Upon a Time Machine for Dark Horse, with another Kirby successor, Stefano Parolo. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing the name. On the stage comic Funny Book, Tragic Book. He has also written the Underworld with art by Giuseppe Paludo and the stage comic, pardon me. He's written The Underworld with art by Giuseppe Pillow, which is a stage comic book, and he's currently working on a Crimean War werewolf epic, which is the best sentence I've said all day, with artist Chaz Ferlethoff. I'm sorry, I can't read my own handwriting there. I apologize for that. We have John K. Snyder, right here to my right. John K. Snyder is a writer and artist of books like Fashion in Action and 8 Million Ways to Die, which is an adaptation of the Lawrence Block novel. He is also the artist of DC comics such as Dr. Midnight and Suicide Squad, one of my personal favorites. We have Jamal Igle. Jamal Igle is the writer and artist of books such as Molly Danger. He's the artist and co-creator of The Wrong Earth for Ahoy Comics, as well as the upcoming Dudley Datson and the Forever Machine for Best Jacket Press on Comixology, which releases in July. Then we have Roy Schwartz at the far end of the table. He is the author of Is Superman Circumcised? The Complete Jewish History of the World's Greatest Hero. He also writes about pop culture for The Forward and for CNN.com, where he's written a series of articles about Jack Kirby for both sites. We have immediately to my left, Dan Hort. Hort, I'm so sorry. Dan Hort, he is the co-founder, of Cosmato Cosplay, as well as Onomatopoeia Art, finding ways to combine comics, fashion, and art worlds together. And I'm so sorry, we have a bit of a panel crasher here. I'm not sure.
Oh, wait, if I don't belong here...
No, you're welcome to stay.
No, because I can get back to my table. I was told I was on here. But there's been a lot of mix-ups.
I insist.
Yeah.
Just introduce yourself.
My name is Stan Lee. My real name is Emmy Award-winning artist Dean Haspiel.
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry.
Your birth certificate?
I had to change it.
It's like when Harlan Ellison had his own name, TM.
Mr. Haspiel, I'm so sorry.
Your name is Dan?
I'm Dan.
Dan.
Yes.
Not only does he have heart, he has Hort.
Yeah,
That's right.
Gotta have hope.
Gotta have Hort.
And cohorts.
I've written and drawn a lot of comics. But I love Jack Kirby, which is why I think I was thrown on here.
Yes.
I crashed it.
No, please, I apologize.
You crashed and pounded.
Let's start with a show of hands of who doesn't love Jack Kirby here on the panel.
Oh, right.
Come on.
Anyone?
None.
Someone came in just to
Right?
devil's advocate.
Need one. Exactly.
Well, I feel like all of us here have our love and passion for Jack Kirby, but let me start by asking, where did that love start? Where was the first moment you remember seeing, like, oh, this is a piece of Jack Kirby art? Was it a particular series character? How did our passion for Kirby begin? Let's start with that question. Anyone wants to jump in?
Well, since everybody's looking at me for
Yes.
some reason. I was 6 years old, grew up in Tel Aviv, Israel, and I saw on a newsstand Marvel Treasury Edition Special Captain America's Bicentennial Battles. Short pithy title, if you remember that. And I remember the moment. I remember thinking, what is this crazy thing with the square fingers and the plate mouth? And what is going on? And it just leapt off the page. It really felt like I was right there rather than just observing. I've seen comics before. Nothing grabbed me like that. And honestly, nothing has grabbed me like Kirby's work since. So that was my moment.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to say because I think I was a fan of Kirby's before I knew I was seeing Kirby's art. You know, he's so definitive.
Sure.
And, you know, so just created the whole vocabulary of superhero and other kinds of comics. Having been prepped with that, I started to notice his name, I think, on New Gods, because I was so into Greek mythology and other mythos that when I saw this bizarre, supersized cosmicized version of Greek and other gods. That was what Hope Me Forever, from that point.
And man, you mean New God reprints or when they came out?
When they came out.
Wow.
That's how old I am.
You're old. Wow. I thought I was old. Like Adam, I don't remember the first time he was always been there in a way, if you were reading comics. But I feel I was such a Fantastic Four fan, and I think that FFs I started reading were like drawn by Keith Pollard with maybe George Perez covers or art or whatever. But at some point I saw this other guy drawing some covers, like they threw this guy a bone. And it was Jack Kirby. And I also distinctly remember, I think he did the cover for issue 200 with Mr. Fantastic fighting Dr. Doom. Like, finally they're going to sell their whatever, right? And then when you go do the back issue thing, this guy's everywhere, this Jack Kirby guy, right? Like, everywhere. So, but I do remember I might have had an allergic reaction a little bit to his art, like I think a lot of kids do. I'm going to use a word that sounds wrong, but if you look at the actual definition, it's probably right. It was grotesque.
Sure.
And I mean that in the best sense of the word. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then you realize, holy mackerel, this guy like co-created and invented so many things. And then later, when I'm a cartoonist, and like I didn't have the confidence to write, so I worked with other writers until little by small I realized I am writing comics because I'm drawing them, and words, the pictures are words, you know what I'm saying? Where image is text. And then you realize, oh, he was an author. He was an auteur, you know? And then you find out all like the kerfuffles and everything else that goes on that we may talk about. But that's kind of my little, introduction to Jack and where that kind of went.
Right. I kind of had the same sort of path that Dean had, but mine was a little bit more visceral. So my introduction to Kirby was superpowers. And at the time, being a kid at the time and looking at it going, what the hell is this? Because I was especially at that point of my comics reading, I was so much more into like people like Jerry Ordway and Jose Luis Garcia Lopez and much more realistic illustrative styles that
the anatomy.
Yeah, if you know my work, then it's very clear, clearly like a big influence and one of the biggest. But I didn't get turned around on Kirby until Marvel reprinted The Fighting American, and that was the stuff that made me go, oh wait, Kirby was a real artist. Like he knew what he was doing.
He knew how to draw, and in a way, I think, and we'll discuss this a little. It almost like he went Picasso.
Yeah, he found the formula. That's the thing that I was going to lead to. Is that he found? I realized, like going back and looking at, the later Kirby, like Marvel Kirby, like not even Fantastic Four because he hadn't really gotten to that point then. But even afterwards, and then on New Gods, like I figured out that this was a guy who had already been like 20, 25 years into his career and figured out what works for him.
And as great as artists ourselves, I know we have more to get to, you start to realize, you start to create your own shorthands, or you start to get bored of the way you draw, so you're trying to do something a little bit different. But also, superpowers is an interesting choice because like, if you look at it, it's clearly broken from an older artist to try to get by. Everything's kind of going sideways a little bit. And so, as kids, you might go, I don't like that because I want the more neo-realistic whatever, right? And as a kid, I don't think I appreciated the Batman TV show as much. And this is a weird parallel.
No, but it's,
as I got
your
older,
point is you're totally right. It's just as an artist, you see actually that, wait a minute, just because as a kid I didn't get it, now as an adult I see how to do it. Frank Robbins is a victim of that. I think.
Thank you, Frank, absolutely.
That people didn't quite get.
Right.
What I would say is, so basically you've all taken my stuff. I was a big
We still have John's against it too.
I was a big Captain America guy. Of course, I actually think that the bicentennial is actually, would be maybe the apex of his career in a lot of ways because it's so good and beautiful and you say a lot of interesting things about the art that we're going to get to in a minute. I also of an age, so the reprints of the Fantastic Four, and that several people have said it, which is true. Is he was ubiquitous. The look was whatever, but it was just there. It was omnipresent. I don't know if you knew it was Jack Kirby. And so for me, as a little kid in the '70s, the place where I really got it from was the television series, the Marvel Superman, Doc Bruce Banner. Those were all the Kirby renditions. They were basically just reprints of the comics and motion movement and those kinds of things. And they were big when I was a kid, and even to some degree as an adult now. You know, the DC guys look like the Super Friends, and the Marvel guys look like the guys on that show. You know, and that was Kirby all the way. And then it is really fascinating because, again, of an age that then, yes, superpowers came in and was interesting because it was DC, and it was that style, and it was maybe not his best work, and had that very much that grotesque where it was a little fat and kind of and strange, which is actually we're going to talk about secretly the Picasso-esque part of his stuff. But as a kid, you might not think it. But to me, the more I said it right before we came on, the one as you know, oh, this guy's the greatest creator. Oh, where I really got it was Destroyer Duck. Because it was much later, and I was the right age, and it was still pretty fucking good. And it looked good, you know?
John? It's interesting to hear everybody's stories, because I kind of have a similar experience in that I grew up with just that Jack Kirby was like the guy that drew all the Marvel stuff. I mean, it didn't, you know, if Gil Kane did like a fill-in, it would really stand out, you know, because it's so used to that Kirby look. But my uncles had a lot of the earlier stuff, so I would look at that. So I mean, I just kind of grew up assimilated to that kind of style, you know, and I liked it, and I was a big fan of the Fantastic Four. But on a personal level, rather than just looking at what my uncles had, when it really hit me personally was in the early '70s. I was in my early teens, and I was traveling, and my aunt had bought me a copy of Jimmy Olsen that had Don Rickles on the cover. And I was getting ready to go on this long bus ride by myself, and to get back from Michigan to Indiana. Anyway, it was a long trip, and I got this one comic, and I reread this one issue of Jimmy Olsen like on the whole trip. But the thing is, and that really got me interested in what Kirby was up to, because again, as we all know, back then, you went on the newsstand, you didn't know that, I didn't know Kirby had left Marvel and started this big thing with DC with the New Gods, and I had no awareness of any of that until I picked up this issue. And so the whole thing was, like, the cover is the Guardian, the Newsboy Legion Guardian, Superman rushing towards you with this big photo of Don Rickles, and who as a kid I thought was funny too, but it seemed so inexplicable to me. I couldn't figure out what was going on. And the caption on the cover is, Kirby says, "Don't ask, buy it. Just buy it." And I was like, well, let's just buy it. And so, but anyway, the whole point is the structure of that. It was like when they went from 12 cents to 25 cents, they had more material. So for me, as a kid, it was like I opened this book up, and the first 2 pages, Clark Kent is floating in a spaceship that's a double-page Kirby photo collage story. This is unlike any Clark Kent Superman story I'd ever seen. So it's like, it's got like photo collage on the cover, then there's this crazy photo collage, which I had been familiar with from Fantastic Four, but but not with Clark Kent. It was like the Fantastic Four, right? And then the story that was just, I had no idea what was going on with any of the Fourth World stuff. But it was really interesting, right? And then there was a midsection where there was a full page of Kirby, like saying about, he's got all these great Golden Age classics to show you. And in his studio window, there's a mountain in the background. And I thought, this is what you want to aim for in life, just to have it like the view out your window is like a mountain. Like, this is a really great scene this guy's got. And then the last part of the book was a reprint of the first Newsboy Legion story from him from the 40s. And I had never seen a Golden Age Kirby story before. So I had no idea that he had this incredibly fluid, detailed, like, instead of all this hard angle stuff, there was all this smooth drawing.
Sure.
And that it had this, in the Newsboy Legion story, it had that Hell's Kitchen, inner city, gangster thing. And I just, the whole thing is, it was one book. You had this guy doing something in the 70s.
A super long career.
And then you got him doing something way back. And I was just, it's almost
constantly
like,
evolving.
And there's like photo collage, and there's like, crime noir, Hell's Kitchen, there's science fiction, and I was like really kind of thrown by the whole thing. And I still look back on it, and I just think that there's a lot of range that you see from one artist, like all in one book.
Right.
You know, so from there on in, I tracked down I managed to find friends that found some of the New Gods comics. And it was all very. That's when I got really interested in him as far as what he was doing, and I loved the Demon when the Demon came out. That was really exciting stuff. So, but it's weird because it was really exciting, but it didn't quite come to completion.
Do you remember the 4:30 movie?
Of course.
And there'll be like a week where they do horror week or whatever.
Planet of the Apes.
I always felt like the Demon was he is watching the 4:30 movie for that series.
That's
I'm gonna
really
do my
great.
Frankenstein. I'm gonna do my Phantom of the Opera this issue.
So that's when I really had a real appreciation of his range.
Right, yeah. And you speaking of range, and I thought of when Dean earlier used the word auteur to describe him, I think of a comics critic, Arlene Schumer, applied auteur theory to Jack Kirby.
Oh, yeah.
And kind of saying he is the authorial voice, because if auteur theory, a director who creates the visual, is the primary authorial voice, then ergo, an artist must be the primary authorial voice of the comic because they are creating the visual for the reader. So I wanted to pose this to you, John, Jamal, Dean. You three are the primary artists at the table, but I also want to extend this question to everybody. What do you see as, or how would you define, I guess, Kirby's authorial voice, and how has that voice affected your own writing? Like when, John, for example, you drew some of the New Gods characters in Suicide Squad, or for any of you who have drawn either Kirby's work or your own work.
Well, I'll start to say that I love Jack Kirby as a writer, artist, auteur, but my favorite Jack Kirby comics are the ones that Stan Lee did at least the dialogue for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The Fantastic Four.
Sure.
Right? But I don't even know if with Jack I would necessarily apply auteur theories or whatever. I might lean more into another term that we use called showrunner.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah. And not that he was working with the staff and people, they left him alone basically, right? Like I think when he came back to Marvel, I feel like when the editor was Archie Goodwin, he was just like there was like this joke, like he wasn't really the editor. It was just like, I oversaw that he did the work, or like traffic cop or something, like they acknowledged that we don't edit Kirby anymore.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And it was also evident they didn't edit Kirby, right? Which is for bad and for good, right? So, and in that way, he is a real auteur because they just kind of let him alone, even though they're trying to make money at this business, right? It's a business.
But I feel like at the same time, like it does apply because so much at both companies rely on one singular creator.
A vision.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's like no more so than I think any other character, like Superman, Batman, have all had multiple creators working on it, all contributing to the lifeline of those characters. Same thing with Spider-Man, same thing.
I call him custodian.
Yeah, exactly. But when it comes to the fourth world, especially, like that is all Kirby.
Right.
There is nothing you can really do with those characters that you can honestly say that you have improved upon. Because the blueprint is there. It's still being used. I mean, I'm watching Young Justice Phantoms. It's all Kirby.
It is. And I would hazard, though, that there are definitely some acolytes, right? Mm-hmm. I think Simonson is an acolyte.
Oh, no, absolutely.
With Thor and Orion, and I think he did he added value, like a lot of people do. But at the end of the day, you're right, there is a certain vision. But when we all cite New Gods, I'm sorry I'm blabbering. I'm the one. When we all cite New Gods, think about the amount of work that he did on New Gods is a drop in the bucket of Kirby's career.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually.
And how much impact that's had for a drop in the bucket.
That's true. DC finally got a big villain.
Yeah.
But you could say the same thing about his Fantastic Four work.
Sure.
But that's why he's an auteur or visionary, in that he had periods, just like Picasso, just like Van Gogh. He had a period where it was about action, and then he had a period where it was about impact. And so his New Gods, whether or not you see it as magnum opus, is very different from his Fantastic Four in any capacity, even though it's the same guy.
But they're different in terms of scale. I think that the Fantastic Four, as big as some of those stories were, I think that by the time he got to really just sort of diving into the whole fourth world, even the New God series within itself, like the scope of it all just became that much bigger. And I think a lot of that is because he was given that runway by DC, you know, and then when he went back to Marvel, the same thing. He was given, you know, just kind of carte blanche to do whatever he wanted. So he just created whatever. You know.
What's interesting about Kirby, and I think is, I mean, again, it's not even, I think, debatable that he's the single most important person in comics for a variety of reasons. Yeah. This panel actually surprises me a little bit because we've actually done a decent amount of talking about him as an artist. Usually when you are on the panels, everybody, Kirby the artist, it's overwhelmingly about the creator elements of all of this.
Right.
And it's, again, those are also sort of unchallengeable. Amongst other things, which is sort of interesting to think about, is there's nobody on this panel that was even alive. We're all probably midway through his second installment of his career, if not late into his career. Right. None of us were alive at that point. So there's such a huge body of work creating Captain America. And obviously, you never want to step on anybody's toes about who did what and other people. Right. You're absolutely, all these things are even if they're the creators, they're custodial also in nature. But nobody like Kirby, not even close. And so to me, I think about it especially in terms of the passing of Neil Adams and George Perez here in the last couple weeks. Where do these guys lie as artists? Right. And I actually am the one, because everybody's talking about creative, then suddenly said, but secretly he was a really great artist. and that actually, that maybe he really was, impactfully on a list with Norman Rockwell, on a list with other people, that he's on that list. I think Neil Adams also is on that list, and can whatever. But that once you add in the creative output, the characters that he invented, the look that he patented, essentially, that. Forget about it. I mean, the guy's got he's the number one guy, he's the king.
But he also redefined the language of superhero comics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And also, I mean, I would hazard, again, as we get older, we can look back and understand things, that you're not looking at drawings, you're looking at ideas. Like, he always had ideas. Like, forget how it looked eventually, whatever his shorthand became. Like, the guy just could not stop with the idea, to the point where it became overwhelming, I think, sometimes. Mm-hmm. Like, he couldn't even get out
like in Forever People, the Asgardian stuff. It's a little Rainbow Bright, a little My Little Pony. But it's actually a little illustrative of the enormity of the impact, that in fact those are the things.
Well, Jamal, you made a comment about, the way that Kirby, the designs, the way it's laid out, it's almost untouchable. So I feel like I have to turn over to John here for a second, because you did draw a story for Suicide Squad where a lot of the Fourth World characters were in it. And I was curious, as you were approaching that story, were you conscious of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, I'm not going to touch these designs much? Or what was the Kirby influence you brought to that book?
I mean, I think Kirby influenced my work, period, because, we're talking about Kirby as a writer, Kirby as an artist, and I was just thinking, you all were talking about this subject, I think of Kirby's visual writing, if you would call it that. And I think as a kid, and when I first started out, and to this day, I'll look at how he lays out a story, and how in different periods of his career, like back when he was doing the Golden Age stuff, the 60s stuff, the 80s stuff, and in terms of how he gets a character or characters from point A to point B, sometimes in a matter of 2 to 3 panels, a character's on Earth and then they're in Asgard. It's like, I mean, and for me, it's like it's intense, that ability to, as a kid, I didn't go, how did this guy get from Earth to Asgard in 3 panels, or the Negative Zone, or whatever, or in New Gods, how did we get from this point to this point? And I found it amazing to how he was able to have this kind of freedom to not overthink, how in the world am I going to do this in such a short period of time? Right. So, to me, it's like he could really show how it's done, and again, to me, that's a form of writing, in that he is structuring the story visually. And with the Golden Age stuff, what fascinated me is how much, it's like there's like 10 panels on the page with tons of little characters around. Right. And it's all legible. Like you can tell what's going on and all that. So, but when I was working on the Apocalypse storyline on Suicide Squad, I definitely was like, I remember one panel in particular where the parademons are coming to attack the squad. And I literally, I had to have like one giant face, at a 45-degree angle with, the mouth wide open, but you can't see the lower half of the teeth or anything. Just, and then like, a guy in the middle, full figure coming right at you. Because the other thing, in addition to his way of compressing time, was, to me, his comics were like 3D comics. I mean, he had no compunction about putting a character in the extreme foreground and a character way behind. I think of like, there's a panel where the Thing hits like a robot or whomever, and the Thing is this big, and the guy is like coming at you, splayed out.
No, and
like,
it's super innovative stuff.
Yeah,
I think he only did that once. And that's only the one time he drew like that.
Right, exactly.
He did that so much, it was awesome.
Right. But that sort of thing, I think, again, so when I was doing all that stuff, it was just like, just that line of thinking, just the extreme foreground, background. It's like, how do they get from like not Arkham,
Bell Reeve.
Thank you, Bell Reeve, from, to the Boom Tube to Apocalypse. And it's like, don't think about it. You just, just draw it. Like you said, just draw it.
In terms of just draw it, and then you'll buy it, basically, as a kid or an adult, whatever.
Right.
You're making me think that he had an art style that lent itself to big ideas, right?
Yeah.
I was just thinking, like, what if Adrian Tomine or Tomina, however you say that, was drawing like a New God script, right? Like, it might be more difficult to buy these leaps, right? Although I think that's an interesting, exercise to see someone who doesn't draw in that way try to do that. When I did The Quitter with Harvey Pekar, a Vertigo graphic novel, which is basically his origin story, I come from Kirby, right? And I'm doing some Autobot, I've done all by myself. And I remember the first reviews came out, at least from fans, who were like, I don't like this art, like, because he's drawing it like an action comic sometimes. And with Pekar, it was mostly talking heads, and people standing around. And I'm like, I'm not going to draw that. I'm trying to find other ways to draw people talking, sorry. So, and that was something that Kirby gave me.
Yeah, and, with the kind of kitchen sink realist version of Kirby that you were proposing with, Adrian Tomine, which the closest we've come to seeing that was Tom King and Mitch Gerard's Mr. Miracle, which I found fascinating because I have, often been frustrated with people who think they need to downscale Kirby, I mean, the classic example being when Jerry Conway was the first person to write New Gods after Kirby and, thought he was bringing realism and, it was just, miniaturizing in a really undignified way. But when somebody who has real command of their artistry, like Miss Gerard's does, attempts to show the grandeur of the New Gods in a really kind of grungy everyday state, that was fascinating. I think it did work. It works mostly because Mr. Miracle was, kind of like our intermediary figure.
And if I may add to that book, the King Gerard's Mr. Miracle, King, I think, sometimes writes PTSD, comics, basically. And I've always thought that Jack Kirby, a lot of his work was PTSD comics. Because of, PTSD. And I think it's evident. Like, he's the one guy, Kirby, that dared to question the idea of God and then answer it. Most people just question what is God. And,
True.
Right?
Yeah.
That's bananas.
Well, and I think that, I don't know if, Roy, if you want to touch on this a little bit, this feels like we're entering into your domain of expertise a little bit.
God is my domain.
Yeah, exactly. I think that you're absolutely right that his experiences in World War II, if he doesn't have those experiences, I don't think we get Darkseid, because Darkseid is fascism personified. Right.
There's more to it because his whole youth was street gang, leaping off rooftops and punching people, which may be why Dean actually was onto something when he did the whole action style Harvey Pekar, because we're in an operas when we talk to people, we punch them. That's just how we do it. But if you look at it from that perspective, the New Gods, which just to remind you is a spin-off of Superman, people forget this, right? The apocalyptic gods are basically all Nazi archetypes, one and all. And the
especially who's the one, Vermin Wunderbar, who's just a Nazi.
Vermin is Vermin and Wunderbar is Wunderbar. There's so much more. Darkseid, Kirby basically said this, is he's a platonic ideal of totalitarianism. And Kirby villains tended to not be lunatics or criminals, but fascists of different kinds. And he's basically space Hitler. He stands on his porch. He speechifies, right? He has these Luftwaffe-like parademons, these groupthink Luftwaffe people. He's looking for the anti-life equation, which is a metaphor for demagoguery and the right conditions of somebody kind of taking over people's minds. And it's all theirs, right? He's basically saying, when we're introduced to the new gods, an era passes in fiery holocaust, and then there was new light. That's the opening of the new gods. And then when we first meet Darkseid, all hail Darkseid, wielder of the Holocaust. And then you see the hunger dogs who wear these striped headgear uniforms, and they're in the Armageddon pits where they, slay. And there's again and again and again. So, a couple of times you can say it's not essential, but he's clearly working his way through something. And there's a million of these examples.
And the archetypal power of it, the archetypal scope, is shown in how durably other figures can be contained in that basic space Hitler trope. I mean, I know Mark Evanier has said that on a given day, Darkseid could be Nixon, or in terms of what was riling up Kirby, and of course. To me, there's direct parallel to the then contemporaneous fascist president Nixon, because in the one thing I've noted, I'm sure I'm not the only one, is that of the Fourth World series, the one where Darkseid has the most screen time by far is Forever People.
Yes,
and that's, I think, because he needs to know what makes them tick. He's often like giving them weird little speeches or trying to turn them to his side, and it very much reminds me of that weird night that Nixon went down to
a series about a bunch of space hippies who come together and unite as one against the fascist government. No, he's not working through anything at all.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, there's the anecdote where Nixon actually went to the Lincoln Memorial at midnight when there was a bunch of peace protesters there to try and mingle with them and ask them what were they about and how could he get in their heads. So,
Well, let me just bring it now full circle back to the fact that the man was a great, truly great American artist. Is that what was set in motion, setting aside all this heady discussion of all this great writing and all these great characters. The visuals of that particular works, though that body of works, is so enduring. Like I said, I mean these I mean you see it all over the place now. Right. Rainbow Bright and My Little Pony, that these very lush rainbow backgrounds, all this kind of stuff. What's I think an interesting and somewhat telling is that Mr. Miracle and Big Barda are, of course, humongously popular with cosplayers. Big Barda particularly is a really fun one that people like. They do Baby Barda. They love it. And to me, I mean, they have, again, this sort of squareness, that kind of stylized where, Neil Adams is, of course, terribly real, and what a great artist. But Jack Kirby was stylized, which may sometimes people are misled to think that means not as good, or somehow that it isn't. It's somehow careless. But the designs that were put through on all of these books, that whole series there for him, and the characters and all of it are everywhere.
But there was a contrast to the designs also, because you had someone as intricate as Barda next to such a simple silhouette in Light Ray, for example.
Sure.
Or Orion without the Astroforce armor.
Absolutely. Far out vehicles.
Yes, absolutely.
Landscapes.
Giant
the whole
machines,
thing. The whole thing. That's why, as I say, I found artistically, again, the Treasury series is not exclusive, but besides, and again, also so much canon Captain America that happens in that thing.
Oh, yeah.
That's sort of weird to think about, that this big, that suddenly all of this stuff, which plays out in so many ways now in the MCU with that Captain America, but nevertheless, he's in outer space.
Right.
He's here. He's there. And there's something about, again, the Americana style of the artwork, the truly, as they say, like a great American artist, like Audubon, like Andy Warhol, like these level people to those looks are everywhere and were really, really powerful. And as you say,
and translatable.
Totally.
And translatable. That I think that gets overlooked more than anything else.
Sure.
And you brought up earlier, Super Friends versus Marvel superheroes, and I was sitting here thinking you had the dichotomy really was Kirby versus Todd.
Right, sure.
You know,
And then you had Thunder the Barbarian. Which
Sure.
is
Well, I was
Yeah.
trying to say this is an interesting thing because it was about Kirby, but Todd was a guy who, in my opinion, created many of, if not the best, non-comic book superheroes. It's a very narrow category, but Space Ghost, for example,
Birdman.
are amongst the very best characters, superhero type character that was not developed in a comic book, and that his creativity is actually quite similarly. It's funny, you never think of him that way because he's cartoons and all this other type of stuff. But that actually you do have to start looking outside of comic books to get anywhere near, you know, and maybe because Stan Lee sort of did, and I don't want to say stole it because I don't think that's an actual fair, and we're not talking about that today. Right. But that Kirby, I think, hands down, had by far in comics the most creativity. So who were the next people? Yeah, Walt Disney, also maybe some people say took, but nevertheless created, but Todd, of course, humongous amounts of...
well, you're talking about design ultimately. Like,
right, and very similar. But as they say, the creative output is just off the charts.
There's the eloquence, you know, what you were talking about, what you and Jamal were talking about, you know, complexity versus, you know, simplicity.
Right.
You know, these are, even Kirby's most intricate designs are instantly recognizable.
Right.
And, you know, Toth had that way of minimally, you know, zero.
And also, I mean, that's the hallmark of great artists. I mean, I believe me, how many times have you stood in a museum with somebody at a Picasso and they're like, I can do this. Like, are you out of your mind? You know? And by the way, interestingly, Picasso, if you ever look at his works when he was a child or whatever, he can do photoreal. Believe me. By the way, he'll take the things on the desk and go like this, and now it's like, oh, very evocative. It's Kirby, Neil Adams was an artist like that. Neil, I spent time with Neil, so I can tell you that Neil was in his everything. He could do anything. He could sculpt. He could do anything. I suspect Kirby also was a guy who, you know, given the opportunity, and I always find, which is fascinating and endearing to me because I come from an agency background, is that Kirby's sensibilities were, of course, of that generation, from the Eisner sensibility of workmanlike, and so when you talk about this business with the 3D, you know, that's innovative stuff, but it's also advertising type stuff, you know, how to pop and how to do in the amalgamation.
He was definitely selling the book.
Sure,
you know?
But that's a quintessential American art form right there that he's emerged in a way that, again, a Warhol or a Norman Rockwell did. That in fact,
you know, speaking of, Kirby was literally at the very heart of the pop culture movement, which is one of the original American. You know, the house ad for Young Romance 26 is the very center of the very first pop art painting, which is what is it about today's home? The same way that Picasso was actually influenced by the Cassinger kids who did that painting. So.
So one thing that I think is interesting about Kirby is there's a lot of aspects of the comic book industry that you can kind of look at his career and say, okay, this can then lead you into discussion of this topic, this topic. And I think one of those things is inevitably the relationship between writer and artist, right? Because I think we often have debates about, I don't like these debates, but quote unquote, who's more important, right? And I know I'm going to maybe sound contradictory by letting Adam speak about this first as a writer. But Adam, you are talking about how you have a lot of collaborators who are very Kirby influenced. And I was curious, what is that collaboration with them like? Do you use a lot of Kirby shorthand, or do you use Marvel method? What is usually the way that you go about working with them? And then I'd like to ask a similar question to the artists here too.
It depends. I mean, Night World, which is, you know, the best known thing that Paolo, Leandria, and I did. That started as Marvel style because he had, that was because of a language barrier. He had drawn all of the first issue in Italian, but even just from his describing it to me, I became so entranced with it, and, you know, thought, well, surely we can do an American version of this, and this would be like the next Hellboy or something. It didn't quite turn out that way, but still. And then, of course, in classic Kirby fashion, he was like, oh, well, I did that 3 years ago. I can do better. So he redrew the entire first issue. And then I scripted it to that after we had some story conferences, Stanley and Jack style. And then over the course of it, I mean, Paolo says that, like, issue 1 was the most him and issue 4 was the most me because, you know, as I saw what his strengths were, I would start to write to them, and you know, it was like almost full script by the end. Otherwise, I mean, it goes back and forth. He brings some things to the table, and I bring some things to the table, and but I absolutely, the more I work with him, work to his strengths, and know what that's going to produce. And I had something else to say, which will come back to me maybe after other people have a chance to talk.
Well, and then I kind of wanted to, sort of flip that question a little bit for the artists at the table. Right. I think it's honestly a crime that, when you read about what drove Kirby away from Marvel, you read stories where there were articles written about Marvel, and they were like, Stan Lee writes and draws everything. It's like, okay, no, that's definitely not how it goes. And I'm curious to know, do you have any thoughts on why it is that there seems to be this imbalance in the public perception of why artists are maybe seen as secondary to writers? Because I don't care how good a comic is written. If it looks like crap, I don't know how much I'm going to want to slap down my money for it each month. I don't know if you guys have any strong thoughts or feelings on that.
Well, I think a lot of it is that the public perception of art in general is not lent towards storytelling in particular, or visual art.
Sure.
Or not in the same way. Like, they understand that film and television is a storytelling medium. But they don't understand that comic book art or even, paintings can be, story driven within themselves. Like, just or
as
even,
a visual.
Yeah, as a visual. And when you combine that with the more American perception of comics being strictly a children's medium, as a juvenile medium, then that's where a lot of the dismissive attitude towards the artists, I think, comes from. Because it's more readily accepted to be a writer, I think, for a lot of people.
You just made me think how to fix the problem, though. Yeah. You get Marvel and DC, dedicate a month, right? They're going to do this together. They're going to publish the next issue of all their comics, script only. Right. And then everyone will come appreciate it.
I'll tell you, I think
it sucks actually.
I think it's just sort of this is like the boring answer to the question that you're asking in terms of why, because I actually think it speaks to Kirby and his issues with Stan Lee to some degree. So I'll give you an analogy that it's in music, for example. The people on this panel all know who the band is and know that Levon Helm and Robbie Robertson had a big battle royale because they were a group that really was a group that everybody created. And when it was all said and done, Robbie Robertson had written everything, and nobody thought much of it, and it didn't matter all that much at the time. And things went on, and a lot of interest. Both Warren Haynes and actually Levon Helm and Robbie Robertson have documentaries talking about their sides of it. But the long story short is this, it was about 30 years later when suddenly having the rights to writing seemed to be worth more than the whatever. And the reality was that he had written it, and that was what had happened.
Right.
And in the same way, certainly in the terms of the Kirby, and indeed there's a lot of great literature. There have been several, two, I think, very good ones. I shouldn't say very good, but read them. Biographies of Stan Lee that talk about his feelings and his side of that argument, and it isn't as simple as
Right.
I stole all his stuff and whatever. And in fact, Danny Fingeroff makes a very interesting, and he was there, so I assume he's he is affectionate and loves Stan, but I think it was fair that Stan really did want to make amends, and that Jack was angry and didn't want to be consoled. Which, by the way, Levon Helm was also sort of inconsolably angry at Robbie Robertson, and so when they tried, but the point of it is this, is that a lot of the things in terms of especially Kirby and Stan Lee, you just didn't know at the time. They just didn't know, and even though it seems so obvious, there's so many things about Marvel and comic books to look back on and say, how did you not know? Right. Stan Lee thought Marvel was going out of business in the 90s.
Right.
That you just didn't know.
I mean, they did go out of business in the 90s. They just...
Yeah, but you just didn't know, and so in some ways, I think that and that's the other thing about Kirby being so much older than all of us, and all that happening in our past, is that it's easy to, I think we're doing in society now, grappling with things that happened that sort of made sense, but now we look at it, what the were we thinking?
Right.
But you didn't know.
Yeah. What you're talking about is the creator question, right? And we weren't there, and you can speculate. There's enough evidence here and there, maybe not enough.
Right.
Did anyone see the Get Back Beatles documentary?
Yes.
Now, most of us know, a bunch of us.
Yeah.
So I'm a Beatles fan, but I'm not a Beatles fan, like,
Right.
you know.
Sure.
And someone said, start watching it. And it's like an 8-hour
Right.
thing, right? Yo, I could not stop watching because I was watching creation happen
Sure,
with
sure.
a bunch of dudes that are just dudes.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not just dudes because they're awesome,
Right.
but they're just
But they're
dudes.
working together and they're doing it.
And they're
Yeah.
doing it,
Yeah.
and you see what, that's one,
Right.
and again,
Sure.
it's only one little drop in the bucket up to their career, right? And so you see McCartney literally create a song
Right.
in front of you on his guitar, right?
Yeah.
You see Lennon, you see Yoko. Yoko's cool, man.
Sure.
Like,
By the way,
what
the
hell?
Imagine documentary is also fascinating.
Oh,
It
really?
shows that kind. Yes.
So, but the thing that freaked me
Yeah,
out
the collaboration.
the most is
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
Ringo was kind of the glue.
Yeah.
Right.
Ringo
Yes.
just
Of course.
watching everybody, and then he's doing his drum thing, right? He's doing his thing. And you realize this is amazing. I don't know how it really applies to this conversation, except when I saw that, it made me go, I don't know anything.
Right,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, I
then
don't
30,
know
40
anything.
years later, John Lennon and Paul McCartney, and it's a little different, but they own rights in ways
Yeah.
that,
Right.
that they just didn't realize at the time. And I do think, as they say, that just in fairness to people that you're looking back on, and in this specific case, in terms of what you're talking about, I think a lot of attitudes, and especially in terms of Jack Kirby, towards writers and creators and who
Right.
did
Yeah.
what and whatever, that it was terribly fluid. And I think, incidentally, and this is not probably the right forum for it, is I think it's foolish for people to want to push Stan Lee too far out
Right.
on
Sure.
all this stuff. As someone who actually spends a lot of time behind creative people,
Yeah.
pushing all day long, I'm the fucking most creative one of all of them, by a lot.
That's
And
right.
it's not even close. So, you know, I get it that whatever, you know, you told me to move
John-
it over here, and I did.
Yeah,
You said make it green.
Yeah.
You know?
John, you want to share your thoughts on the topic?
Well,
So-
well, it's just interesting again to hear everybody's response to the working relationship between Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. To me, it's just, for me, it's been personally looking at Kirby's work with Stan Lee and Kirby's work on his own, and I think you can really see. I think that's kind of how I kind of balance out how I perceive the input, because it's there. You can see
Right.
like what a Stan Lee Jack Kirby comic is like, and a Jack Kirby writing Jack Kirby comic is like. And it's funny you mentioned the Beatles, because it makes me think you can listen to Abbey Road, and then you can listen to Venus and Mars
Right.
from Wings, and then you can listen to one of John Lennon's albums, and it's like, and even a Ringo album or George Harrison album. There's a similar sound, but they're all very distinctly different, and they tend to go off in directions.
Mm-hmm.
The Beatles stuff to me is almost like this kind of perfect pop equation.
Right.
The other guys on their own, they're still, these amazing pop songs, but they tend to go off in a more like personal direction. The Stan Lee and Jack Kirby combination to me is kind of that perfect pop mold again.
Yeah.
And the Kirby stuff tends to go off in another direction. And I think with the least, Kirby's input, when you see these pencils reproduced with all Kirby's notes,
Oh,
and
Oh,
stuff,
yeah,
Oh,
of
yeah.
course.
that's kind of his writing style, And
Right.
you kind of look at a page that Kirby penciled with his notes, and then if you read the Stan Lee final script, like with the balloons and all, I think there's a certain tethering there from Lee's, kind of bombastic, it's almost like a radio DJ or the announcer from Bullwinkle, or it's like, next, and all that. And then the Kirby stuff is, a lot of exclamation points too, but it goes off in these directions that sometimes didn't really, like a lot of the storylines didn't get finished, because I know the books, some of them were canceled and such, but I think, I know as an artist, I worked a lot with Matt Wagner, a lot on a number of books, and we worked in that similar style. Of idea generation, and then he would give me general plot lines on the pages, and I would go home and write out the scripts and such. But the whole point is that I would have ideas about, we could have this, and this happen, and then Matt would write the script. And again, I felt like I just feel like writers have a way of bringing a certain level of logic to the goings on, no matter how fantastic they are. And sometimes when you're thinking of all the visuals, you kind of lose a little of that.
Right.
You kind of want to go more visual and more. So I think personally, the Stan Lee Kirby combination was, I don't think it's to be underestimated in terms of how it resulted in this thing that they created together. And what really is interesting to me about the whole Stan Lee thing is we think of Stan Lee as part of Marvel forever, but his actual writing, the height of his writing period from Fantastic Four #1 to where he went off to the West Coast, I think it's less than 10 years.
Yeah.
It's this.
It's a ninth of his life.
Yeah. So but Kirby kept drawing forever. So yeah, it's definitely something where I don't think that you can underestimate the amount of the successful combination of those two working together.
Yeah. And I would take it one step further for a guy who had a tremendously long career, as we've already sort of gone over, and did a lot of good things without Stan Lee. And stuff with Stan Lee was probably the best.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's debatable, and I would have that discussion.
Right.
But for me, for my money, and again, to me, I feel like, as you sort of again bring it back to you talking about the style, which I love, is that those Fantastic Fours, those early. I had the little pocket, the little paperback pocket edition of that, and there's so much interesting stuff. They put the scrolls out in the pasture. It's like
Tournament accounts.
Oh my God! That didn't come back to haunt for decades. They just let that go. But
those became burgers, right?
Right.
Yes.
We had done a panel yesterday about Star Trek in comic books, and it was interesting and all of that. And to me, you got to have a little science in your fiction if you're going to try to do that kind of stuff. And the Fantastic Four, I mean, as science heroes go. And that's the part that's so interesting is, I like them better than Doctor Who. I like them. They can bang with the big ones and get outside of their own medium, where suddenly you start to look, as I say, Jack Kirby is an American illustrator, as a well-known artist, as these characters as competing in media. I mean, again, I do a whole thing where I talk about how Superman, is Johnny Appleseed and these kinds of things, and that Kirby, I mean. Just right there, and the Fantastic Four for me particularly, but also the Avengers, the Hulk, the Incredible Hulk. We did a panel earlier where somebody was talking about the Incredible Hulk was the number 2. Spider-Man and Hulk were lunchboxes for about 20 years while Stan Lee thought they were going out of business and didn't know what the hell was going on. They had lunchboxes with Spider-Man and the Incredible Hulk. And I think Kirby clearly gave it that gentle giant, had that kind of something that he just So I like I said, great career. But Stan Lee, the Marvel era, those early stuff. Oh man.
Yeah.
It sometimes it depends on what your entry point was, because
of course.
My Kirby starts with the Fourth World, just because that's the stuff that was coming out new. When I started reading it, but. It speaks to what Roy and Dean was saying about periods. I mean, it's almost like, to your point, that the FF is Kirby's science period, and the New Gods is his magic period,
right?
His spiritual period.
Sure, and the Newsboys was his gritty street
his noir.
And again, what a long and incredible career.
And but one thing that's interesting about Lee to me is that. I don't know how many people read it, but the last issue of What If, in other words, the end of the original run, which was in the early 2000s, I think, there was a Watchers story that Stan wrote and that Dale Eaglesham drew in a highly Kirby style, of course, as he usually does. And that is one of the best things I think Stan Lee has ever written. And it's something about that look, I think, that, just triggered a certain chemical reaction in his creativity.
Yeah.
So, it could be, one way of saying that is that Stan needed Jack more than vice versa, perhaps. But
for a long time, though, on the back end of Stan Lee's career, he made a point of saying, great, loved him, feel bad that that wasn't how it was.
Right.
That he really did make of. And as they say, there's the one biography that was very well reputed that's a little more of a hit piece. I find the Danny Fingeroff one, again, he loved. I once read a biography where the guy said you only write books about people you love. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's something to that. So surely it's a little maybe sugar-coated, but for sure the whole time, really that it wasn't Stan's intention that wasn't, then suddenly, as you say, Jack was really angry and whatever, and
of course,
but then he wasn't saying I.
So I know we could talk Jack Kirby for more and more hours, and I would love to, but we do unfortunately have to wrap up because we have 2 minutes before another panel comes in. Can we rapid fire just go down the row and say favorite Jack Kirby comic that everybody should read.
Okay.
Can we do that? So starting at the end of the month?
That's crazy time.
I'm sorry, I'm putting you right on the spot.
I'm going to have to say the Captain America run when he came back to the title with Mad Bomb and all that kind of stuff, where he combined street level hardcore action with just insane science fiction ideas, and it was seamless.
Yeah.
I'll narrow it down to one story. Him own number 8 of Mr. Miracle, just because it had this like nightmare fairy tale feeling, which just really imprinted and warped my brain, from that moment onward.
Yeah.
Excluding his collaboration with Stanley, my favorite Jack Kirby comic is OMAC, One Man.
I was about to say the same thing, actually. So, OMAC.
Read those early Fantastic Fours. The first, 100, 200 issues. but the first, 10.
Yes.
They're groundbreaking.
I have to say that it's got to be the Fantastic Four run. When him and Stan Lee and Joe Sennett they were about 50 issues in, and just right around that period where I think when Dr. Doom stole the Silver Surfer's cosmic surfboard.
Yeah.
I just think that's one of that as a kid and to this day, I just think that was a real milestone in terms of just stretching. Like, it's just kind of an ultimate supervillain run. So that's definitely my vote.
Gentlemen, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Long live the king. Thank you all for watching.